up the middle.
Hands up.
Hello and welcome to the Children's Institute for Pediatric Trauma video educational program on athletic emergencies. This particular video will focus on football injuries and football equipment and will hopefully help you as a provider of care to athletes to provide better care for them should a spinal injury occur. EMS agencies across North Carolina and across the United States attend athletic events, football games namely, on a regular event, and are those providers appropriately prepared to handle a potential spinal injury. We want to make these EMS providers, sports medicine first responders, and athletic trainers better prepared and have better skills when it comes to providing care to an athlete who may have a spine injury. So what are some basic assumptions that we need to operate on? Most people understand that EMS professionals have put more people on spine boards or other type of movement devices than most any other profession. That's what they do. Let's flip that coin over and realize that equipment managers, athletic trainers, and sports medicine first responders have more experience with football equipment such as helmets, face masks, and shoulder pads. We need to bring these two professions together to provide excellent care to an athlete who has potentially a spine injury. So what we want to do is make certain that those EMS agencies, those recreation leagues, those high schools are adequately prepared with not only appropriate training and equipment to provide the best care possible in the event of a spine injury to an athlete who's playing football or some other contact or collision sport. So what we're going to do is, over the next few minutes, outline some equipment, some treatment, and some transportation protocols that will hopefully, in the end, improve patient care for that potential injury to an athlete. When we talk about protective equipment for the football athlete in particular, two things come to mind, the helmet and the shoulder pads. Let's talk about the helmet first. The football helmet itself is a 4mm piece of PVC plastic. That plastic is protective but not preventative against concussive force. And as you can see on the table in front of us, there are many different styles that we have to deal with. A couple of important points to think of right quick when we talk about the football helmet itself. That is also the face mask and the integration with the helmet itself. When you look at a football helmet and you go to remove it, one of the things you will notice is the fact with the face mask on, there's not a lot of movement from the helmet itself. Let's compare that to a football helmet where the face mask has been removed. Notice the difference in the movement of the helmet when it's being removed from the athlete. Again, this is something to think about. We'll also talk about each of these football helmets and how to remove those face masks, because in the collection that you see in front of me here are 6 different football helmets, all of which operate in a different mode in regards to the removal of the face mask itself. So we've talked about a general overview of football helmets. Let's now speak specifically to how football helmets face mask interface and attach to each individual helmet. Be aware of what your particular high school, athletic club, what your college wears, because there's a numerous amounts of equipment that exist on the market today. And as such, you'll need to be familiar with what your team covers in your particular area. The way most face masks are attached to a helmet is by a system of either brackets or small mounting devices that attach directly to the helmet. So let's look at a couple of helmets and see if there's some difference between each of these. Now, when we go to remove the face mask from a helmet, let's look at 3 basic concepts, actually 4 to begin with. If we have an emergency and if we need to remove a helmet face mask, the first thing we need to look at is there a quick release device that is on the helmet? Certain brands of helmets have available tools to help you in that regards. The next thing to think about is, do you have the ability to have available a cordless screwdriver? Research has shown that one of the most effective ways in a helmet that has screws for the attachment point is to use this device. If by chance you don't have that available, a manual screwdriver will work as well, preferably a Phillips head. Last but not least, things that need to be available is some form of cutting tool to be able to cut the plastic mounts that attach the face mask to the helmet itself. So let's look at a couple of helmets here right quick. Again, these are all industry standard helmets that exist that you may face when you cover an athletic event. This particular model helmet, if you look at it quickly, has a series of 4 screws, one on the jaw pad, 2 over the eyebrow, and 1 on the jaw pad here. Again, no quick release mount on this particular model helmet. Again, all screws to deal with. Here's a different helmet. Notice the difference. Still screws over the crown, but notice the difference here. This is a Revolution helmet with a quick release bracket. We'll talk more about those here in just a few moments. But again, one on each side that allows for quick removal of the face mask. Let's look at this particular model. Noticing the fact conspicuously missing from the top of the helmet are screws mounting the face mask. On this particular model, there are 2 quick release brackets on the left and 2 quick release brackets on the right. Again, something that being aware of the equipment that your team wears being very appropriate. Let's move to something different. Noticing on this particular helmet, we see screws, 2 over the crown, 2 on each side. Interestingly enough though, these are not traditional screws that have to be backed all the way out. These are quarter turn screws that you only have to turn a quarter of a turn to be able to release the face mask. Something to consider on that model. A different model that we need to look at. Again here, there are screws on the side, but the face mask mount has a 90-degree turn mounting device with it. So again, something different for this particular model helmet. Last but not least, a combination of what we've just noticed. Quarter turn screw for the face mask mount, then on the top, a 90-degree or quarter turn mount here as well. So again, each of these helmets unto themselves, industry standard, but all operate in a different mode. Hence the point, knowing what helmet your particular team wears or your school district wears becomes very important to providing care to that athlete. Now then, as we wrap up talking about football helmets, one other thing we need to consider is even though this video project focuses on football itself, there are other types of sports and other types of equipment that need to be addressed, such as, let's look at something like baseball. Here's a classic example of a new style catcher's mask. Notice the fact that there is a face plate on the front with screws that attach the face mask, much like a football helmet, and a protective occipital cap as well. This can be removed easily with a pair of scissors. Another issue is the protective equipment that the catcher would have to wear, such as a chest protector. Again, this can be removed with appropriate training and something that you should consider for your training programs at your local institutions. When you look at a traditional player, whether they be pee-wee, high school, or even college, the shoulder pads themselves come out over each shoulder and then come around the top part of the chest itself. When you look at it though, there are several things that we need to address from the athletic training and the emergency services world. First of all, what holds the shoulder pads together? There will either be a piece of plastic or a shoestring that ties the middle of the shoulder pads together. On either side of this shoulder pad will either be a plastic or leather belt and potentially an elastic belt as well that fits into this T-handle receptacle here. All of these are easily removed during normal operation, but also can be easily cut as well. Now when you cut the front of this, as we turn the athlete around, the football pad itself is connected in the back. You won't have to worry about this because the pads will actually clamshell open and fall back, making it easier to remove. So that's one type of shoulder pad. So let's look at a different set of shoulder pads here for just a second. This is a classic example. Notice there's a shoestring in the front, easily accessible with a pair of scissors. Again, this would be cut if we needed to remove the pad fully. Another thing that you notice with Peyton's pads is he has side or thorax protection as well. Again, any accessory onto a set of shoulder pads is easily unbuckled or can be cut with a pair of scissors. With his thorax protection, undo the Velcro and it opens up. Let's look at the back of his shoulder pads here for just a minute. As he turns around, same here. These could be cut easily with a pair of scissors, But when these pads are clamshelled open, this drops away from the athlete and is easily removed. Now this is one type of protection that goes all the way around Peyton. Notice the fact it protects his back, his sides, and even comes to the front. Compare that to this particular pad. With this pad, there is protection on the back, but not in the front. Same example here. This is easily removable with a pair of scissors, but when the pads are clamshelled open, there will not be an issue because the athlete's weight is not on these when the pads are removed. So one of the things we need to consider when an athlete goes down on the field is how do we approach them? One of the most important things is to, if possible, approach from the feet. This way the athlete doesn't try to look up or turn their head to the side. And then this way you immediately gain spinal motion restriction.
Don't move, buddy. We're going to take good care of you, okay? Take your mouth.
Talk to them, reassure them, tell them not to move. The other thing that Donnie's going to do is he's going to be explaining to them what's going to happen. The use of the board, other people coming out onto the field, and again, reassuring the athlete the entire time this process is ongoing. So some things that we need to review are some don'ts when you approach the athlete. One of the things is to immediately walk up and touch the patient on the helmet and try to assess responsiveness by actually tapping him on the side of the helmet. Another thing that we need to think of is don't use the athlete's face mask as a handhold for yourself because the potential for airway issue or also movement of the helmet. Another thing to consider when you approach the athlete is to not immediately remove the patient's chin strap. That helmet and shoulder pad unit is integral to maintaining cervical motion restriction. Leaving that chin strap in place is of ultimate importance. So one of the situations you may be faced with is an athlete who's actually face up. In the grand scope of the situation, this is a much easier scenario to deal with than an athlete that's actually face down. Now, when you come up on an athlete that's face up, again, you want to make certain that you approach in an appropriate manner. Notice the fact how Donnie's talking to the athlete. He put his knees on either side of the head to maintain cervical spine motion restriction. He removed the mouthpiece if it had not already been removed and is maintaining motion restriction while the crew comes out. Now what we're doing in this particular scenario is what's known as an 8-man lift. Donnie is at the head, 3 crew members on each side, and the device that we're using at this point in time is a long spine board. But remember, evidence-based medicine says that we're not going to leave the athlete on the spine board for transport to the hospital. So we need a mechanism to remove the athlete from the board once we get him to the ambulance stretcher. If you'll notice what Brian's doing is he is pre-deploying a sheet onto the spine board so we can get the athlete off the board before we go to the hospital. Notice that the athlete comes up only just a couple of inches and the board slides up underneath. Commands were given by the person at the head. Head blocks are put into place. The athlete's head and body would then be secured onto the board, and then we'd remove the patient from the athletic field. So let's look at a different scenario. Remember the fact that evidence-based medicine shows that spine boards aren't a good thing to take people to the hospital on, so maybe your recreation club, high school, or EMS agency uses a different device, like a scoop stretcher. So again, what you notice is the fact that Donnie comes up again, maintains control, but notice that we're going to use a different device this time. This is a scoop stretcher. It has to be measured for the particular athlete's height. So it's a little bit different than a long spine board. Once it's measured, what we'll do is the same basic process. We'll actually use this 8-man lift like we did before, but actually transfer him over to the board. Now notice a couple of things. In this particular situation, we have a very tall athlete. So the athlete's feet may actually hang off the end of the stretcher. That's okay, because remembering, we're only using this device to be able to move him over to the ambulance cot. Notice what Donnie's doing, again, communicating with his team that we're ready to move. The device comes in, slid in, and the patient's lowered down on the device. Just like with the long spine board, notice the fact that we'll secure the head, secure the body, then move the patient over to the ambulance cot to be removed from the field. So some potential issues that arise with the use of a scoop stretcher are some of the things we need to review here right quick. First of all, look at how the athlete is placed on the device. The crown of the football helmet has to be below the level of the actuator to be able to make certain that the device can be split apart. Another issue is the size of the athlete. Notice the fact already that the shoulder pads hang off the side of the scoop stretcher, and with more weight on the head of the scoop stretcher, it may actually be difficult for Josh to be able to pull the latch apart when we go to remove this device before we go to the hospital. So again, these are all issues, not saying the device is not appropriate for the use of a spine injured athlete, but some considerations when using. Another option that you may want to consider at this particular point in time is a device called a combi carrier. Now, it kind of brings the best of both worlds together of a long spine board and a scoop stretcher as well. With the combi carrier, it's a backboard that can be divided into two different pieces. So the procedures are indeed still the same. We'll do the 6+ lift with Donnie at the head, 3 crew on each side, and the board will come in from the foot. But notice this time we will not have to use a sheet to be able to remove the athlete from the device prior to transport from the hospital. Again, we make certain that there is ultimate communication between all parties involved. The board's ready. The athlete's raised. Brian slides the board in from the bottom. The athlete's placed on the device. And again, just as before, the head is secured, and then the patient will be made ready to be moved off the field over to the ambulance cot. So what you can see in this particular situation is with the athlete that is face up, you have 3 different options to look at. One more thing that we'll do also is use a mega mover, which is a different EMS device that you can use to move a patient, and we'll demonstrate that now. With the mega mover, the process is the same as it is with an 8-man lift, the spine board, and the sheet. Donnie takes out the mouthpiece, the crew pre-deploys on either side, and Shannon brings the board up to the foot just like we've done in the past. The board comes to the feet just like before, but instead of using a sheet this time, we're going to use a device called a mega mover. The mega mover is designed for somewhat obese patients, is reinforced for people of heavier weight, and also has handles on either side that make it easier for deployment and easier for use. Notice that Donnie continues to talk to the athlete, and the crew is advised on lift. The board is slid into place, the mega mover underneath, and the athlete is returned down to the spinal device. Head blocks are put in place, and the athlete would then be secured to the board for movement over to the EMS stretcher and off the field. One of the things that has been done in the past, that has been done not only in the athletic training world but in EMS, is also a maneuver called a log roll. So let's look at this particular crew. They come in and address an athlete who has a potential spinal injury, and we make certain that we maintain spinal motion restriction, and we get the crew ready to be able to use the backboard to come in to remove the player from the playing field. All right? They reach across and get hand position ready, and let's watch and see what happens as the athlete is rolled up on his shoulder. Now, here's the potential that we get into with this particular situation. Notice how much of the energy goes through that shoulder, and could there be the potential for spinal motion when we come up on the shoulder itself? Again, this has been an industry standard for years, and it's something that we need to consider. How much patient movement is there when we use this particular movement on the athletic field itself? And this crosses not only the athletic training world, but pre-hospital care as well. The question you're left with, is there a better way? And that's something that we'll address later on in this video.
Ball carrier for the Panthers, number 1.
So one of the situations you may face is an athlete who's face down on the turf. So your concern is not only cervical spine immobilization, but also looking to see if there's an airway problem as well. So when you come up to the patient such as this, you're wanting to look at him and tell him not to move and everything, and then your crew's going to come in and again maintain cervical spine motion restriction. One of the things that Ashley's going to do right now is she's making certain if the athlete's breathing and if she'll talk to him. She's also summoned her crew at this particular point in time, so we'll look at moving Peyton over from the face down position to the face up position. What they're going to use is what's called a log push maneuver, where we'll actually push him over onto the board instead of a log pull that has been done in the past. There is intimate communication between the person at the head and the patient and also the crew. Notice is when they roll over, it's one fluid movement that comes over as the athlete comes over onto the board. The next thing that they notice is the athlete is not correctly positioned in the sense of in the middle of the board. So what we do is a V method maneuver to put the athlete up to where the patient's actually secure and in the middle of the board. But let's look at another situation here for just a minute. So now then we've taken an athlete who's actually breathing, who's conscious and talking to us, but what about a situation such as this? What about a situation where this athlete's not moving, and when Ashley assesses them, maybe there's the potential for an airway problem. She comes up and realizes the fact that he's not breathing or not responsive. So the decision is made to make an emergency move to get the athlete over onto his back so we can remove the face mask and then get an airway in the child if we need to. All right. Again, once the emergency move is made, now then we need to remove the mouthpiece if it's not already been removed. We would remove the face mask and restart resuscitative efforts if needed to be. Notice the fact that when Ashley approaches Peyton in this particular scenario, he has a face mask plant, which puts his neck a little bit farther back. Noticing what she does, she slowly moves the neck at this point in time to a neutral position. Again, neck fractures occur from high velocity injuries, not slow motion movements. As the team approaches with a child that is smaller, Ashley has to change her angle of how she holds the helmet and how she's offset to be able to make the roll more appropriate when that happens. Now we'll let her call the roll and watch what happens.
1, 2, 3.
Now then, notice what happens. There was a nice fluid movement and Ashley was ready to receive the helmet and receive the neck when we rolled over. Noticing also that her thumbs are in the ear holes, and if needed, she could slide her hands down now, more on the sides of the neck to maintain cervical motion restriction. So one of the issues we face when the athlete is face down is how do we get them over onto the board? We're going to do what's called a log push. Let's look at hand placement at this particular point in time, and noticing the fact we're not pulling the athlete towards us, we're actually going to push the athlete over onto the board. On Ashley's call, we'll begin the process of rolling the athlete. With the roll itself, there is less torque on the cervical, thoracic, and lumbar spine as compared to when you pull the athlete over using the log roll maneuver. Just as we have done before, if the athlete is not appropriately centered on the board, we'll use the V method maneuver to get him centered and then place the straps for removal from the field. So when the patient has been appropriately placed onto a device, we need EMS to be able to remove the athlete from the playing field. So what you'll notice is Josh and his crew have the patient appropriately placed on a device, and we're going to coordinate with EMS moving from the turf over to the stretcher and then leaving the playing field as well. Notice the fact that Josh communicates with the crew. The stretcher comes underneath the board and then onto the ambulance stretcher itself. The athlete will then be secured to the ambulance cot, removed from the playing field, and then we'll remove the athlete from either the spine board, the scoop stretcher, or the combi carrier out of public view and off the playing field. So as we leave the field of play, one of the things that has to happen is, again, according to evidence-based medicine, we don't want to leave the athlete on the spine board or any device for transport to the hospital. So one of the things that will happen as we get to the back of the ambulance, we'll need to make the decision through local protocol and through agreement to remove the athlete from the either spine board, scoop stretcher, or the combi carrier. In this particular situation, you note the fact that we used a sheet to place the athlete on the board. So you'll notice Josh is communicating with EMS as to how to unbuckle the patient and then the commands that we will use in order to lift the patient up off the spine board and then back down onto the ambulance cot where he will be secured for transport to the hospital. This is the reason we used a sheet underneath him to remove him from the spine board prior to transport. Just like we did on the field, we'll use a team-based effort using the sheet rolled up tight to lift the athlete and remove the spine board. Notice how, just like on the field, we used the sheet to lift the athlete up, the board was removed, and now then we're going to reapply cervical motion restriction, tape the helmet down, load the patient in the ambulance, and transport to a local medical facility. One of the issues that we face is we remove the patient from the field, and this time we used a scoop stretcher. Now the beauty of the scoop stretcher is we don't have to use another sheet or anything, and we don't have to lift the victim off of the stretcher to be able to get them ready for transport into the ambulance. Noticing the fact we're removing the head blocks, Ashley's maintaining spinal motion restriction, and notice the beauty of the scoop stretcher is we don't have to lift the victim and the two wings of the stretcher come out from either side. Now then, Shannon, Brian, and the crew buckle up the patient, make them ready for transport, and we'll reapply the head blocks, taping them and the helmet down to the stretcher as Ashley continues to hold cervical spine motion restriction. As we talked about before, the combi carrier is an alternative to a scoop stretcher and also a long spine board, with this advantage being the fact it is still long enough that it does not have to be sized for the individual athlete. Noting in this particular scenario, Scott maintained cervical motion restriction. We're going to remove the head blocks, and then by pulling a handle, the device splits in two and we're able to slide out from under the athlete, again, just like the scoop stretcher, not moving the athlete in the process. So one of the things we need to cover is face mask removal on the field because, again, it's going to be of utmost importance because of an airway issue or anytime the patient's going to be taken off the field by EMS or by stretcher, the face mask needs to go. Now, Scott's going to come in and we're going to take this face mask off using a combination of devices. All right? What we have here is a cordless screwdriver. When we look at face mask removal, we look at quick release mounts, cordless screwdriver, manual screwdriver, and then cutting tools as the four-step option in order to remove a face mask. Studies have shown that in about 45 to 60 seconds, you can remove a face mask with a cordless screwdriver. So again, this is part of the equipment that we have on scene, either with the athletic club, the high school, or with EMS to be able to remove this face mask. The face mask is removed, so if we had an airway emergency, we could gain access to the airway and start resuscitative measures. Again, leaving the chin strap in place for the process, and again, if we choose to remove the helmet and the pads, that's a totally separate operation. Ashley has never let go of the neck and has maintained appropriate cervical spine motion restriction during the entire process of the face mask removal. One of the important points that you need to remember when dealing with a student athlete is talk to them during the time of this potential injury. They may never have been hurt before, they may be scared, so having that ongoing dialogue to soothe them and tell them what's going on becomes very important. We've made the decision to do a total gear removal. One of the first things that happen is while the neck is being held, the jersey has to be removed. Note an important point, all scissor action is away from the patient's face. We want to go ahead and clear the jersey to get exposure to the chest as quick as possible. You have two options. You can undo the belt or you can cut the belt as well. That helps hold the pads on to the athlete. There'll be a series of belts on the side, and in the front there'll either be a string, a piece of plastic, or multiple pieces of plastic that will actually hold the pads together as a unit. All of this needs to be cut before we ever think about removing the patient's helmet. Notice what Donnie's doing now. Again, moving away from the patient's face, we're cutting the chin strap. Again, we don't want to unbuckle, and we'll talk more about that in just a few minutes. This is a group effort. With Donnie and Josh, we're going to coordinate removing the helmet. Notice what Donnie does. He's going to pull the helmet apart using the jaw pads, pull the helmet back, and then rotate up and away. While this is happening, Josh is still maintaining neck control. While he lifts up gently, the pads are pulled out from underneath the athlete, and the athlete is returned back to the ground with his neck in neutral alignment. Who better to do this than the EMS professionals and the athletic training professionals who are there on the scene? One thing that we need to remember, especially for high schools here in the state of North Carolina, is it is mandated that each school have an emergency action plan. In that action plan, there has to be an outline for how the school and the athletic program interfaces with emergency medical services in regards to, are they on standby? How does the ambulance get into the event if they're responding to it and not on scene? And how the actual school will alert EMS and call 911 and provide access to their practice fields or their athletic fields. Again, this is mandated by the state of North Carolina and in fact many other states in the United States. Before each athletic event, it is recommended that the school, recreation league, and the emergency responders have a timeout session before the event. During that timeout session, several things can be reviewed, many of which already exist in the emergency action plan. Since the unit is already on scene, there will not have to be an issue regarding how the ambulance enters the venue, but there could be issues as to how the emergency medical services professionals enter the playing field or get into the stands. Other things to be considered: what type of equipment is available on site for the responders as well as from the school itself. Going through this equipment before the game can eliminate any issues should an emergency occur. The other thing to review is there a universal signal that the sports medicine professionals will use if there is an injured athlete on the field and they require EMS. Some places actually have walkie-talkies. Others use a universal signal, as many of schools in this area do, such as a raised fist, and that would indicate that EMS needs to enter the playing field and to assist the sports medicine professionals in the care of this athlete. When the EMS unit is on scene at a standby, it's important for that patient care equipment to be response ready. That means outside of the ambulance, unloaded, response ready with every piece of equipment needed to care for that athlete loaded onto the stretcher. Should an emergency occur, we don't need to take the time to have to unload the stretcher and then respond out onto the field. Our goal is to be able to improve care to these athletes and these children who live in our communities. As a coach will give a pregame or a halftime speech to pump up his team, our challenge to you is to provide the best care possible to these athletes. From the EMS side, to the sports medicine first responder, to the athletic trainer. Providing the best care possible to these athletes is our goal and our challenge to you.